Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to Hail Yes, a Detroit Free Press podcast about University of Michigan athletics. I'm Tony Garcia, Michigan football and basketball writer for The Freak, joined as always by the fellas, Reiner Sabin, our Big Ten insider, and Andrew Burkle, our editor and producer. And boys, you know why we're here. Final week of September, coming off a huge weekend win, and just like that, the Tigers are still in the playoff race. Isn't that right, Reiner?
Yeah, it's pretty miraculous. I mean, I don't think we thought that was going to happen on August 1st. But, you know, when you have also the pretty much the unanimous Cy Young winner and Chris Fetter, it seems like he's some kind of wizard. Things can happen.
I tried to catch Reiner off guard there. I didn't tell either of you which direction I was going with that intro, and he was so unfazed. Like, it was like we were going to do a Tigers podcast. Like, he was just ready to go into it. But quickly, Andrew, your thoughts on just the hottest team in the country.
It's been so much fun to watch. But I mean, just when you thought we didn't have enough going on between, you know, the best Lions team of the decade maybe of our lives or any of our lives, and the Michigan coming back off a national title, Michigan State's got a new coach, and the Tigers are somehow the story in the town because they're that hot. It's still been fun. I've been watching every game like it's like appointment viewing. It's so fun.
Absolutely. Two-game lead in the wild card, 5 to play. We're recording this a little before 11 a.m. on Wednesday, September 25th. So something may have happened by the time you listen to this. But yeah, no, definitely exciting stuff. And of course, that was said tongue-in-cheek. This is a Michigan football podcast, and Michigan naturally coming off of its own just thrilling victory in its own right to keep the season alive, right? I mean, maybe it's not at the same juncture as the Tigers, but every bit a had-to-have-it victory this past weekend in Ann Arbor, Reiner. 27-24, the Wolverines beat the Trojans in a welcome to the Big Ten for USC. Just, I mean, we were talking about a pregame. It was just so cool to see all those jerseys on the same field. Felt like a Rose Bowl. We now know what that feels like firsthand. I mean, the ambiance wasn't quite at that level, obviously, but this was a big game, big programs, a slugfest. Michigan blows 2 double-digit leads separately, still finds a way to win. And on today's episode, we're going to talk about the good, which is the win and finding their formula, and then the bad, which was how they almost did not get this done. But Reiner, as we said, it starts with the good, which is finding a way to get it done.
Yeah, it was an impressive win. I mean, again, I think most people thought USC was going to come in and beat Michigan. And, Michigan was able to kind of put together like you referenced, the perfect formula to kind of combat USC, and things kind of went their way, especially early, which put them in position to win late. But there was obviously some concerns, with how the second half went. And, they nearly didn't pull it out. So it was a strange game because I think all of the fan base had really mixed feelings coming out of it. Like, relieved that they won, but also concerned about what it really means and if it was just an anomaly or aberration and whether it can be actually sustained, what Michigan was able to do to win the game.
I felt myself thinking both ways, right? It felt like one half of my brain was seeing it one way and the other half was seeing it the other. And time will tell which take, I guess, is correct. And we'll start with, because they did win, the positive view. Michigan just passed for 32 yards in a game against a top 15 team with a prolific offense and won. That is no small feat. I mean, the last time Michigan won a game where it had this few of passing yards, Bo Schembechler was walking the sidelines, right? It was the first year after Jim Harbaugh was done quarterbacking, right? He was a rookie. Jim Harbaugh was a rookie in the NFL the last time Michigan won a game like this. So yeah, there's questions about the sustainability, the repeatability, but when that was one of the 4 biggest games on the schedule, right? You got maybe you could argue 3, because Texas, a huge game. Obviously, they're top 2 team in the nation, but that's non-con. And now with the new format, you can absolutely absorb that type of loss. The real part was how they lost that game, right? It wasn't that they lost. A close loss really wouldn't have hurt them almost at all. Now that they had fallen, you couldn't afford going to 2-2 and 0-1 in the Big Ten. You'd have to nearly run the table to keep a hope at a college football playoff alive, is sort of the feeling. But in order to do it, by doing it, for me, there are a few questions. Obviously, we have to have the discussion of how sustainable this is, but you only have to play this level team maybe 2 more times, Reiner, right? I mean, there are some questions. I mean, some games that Minnesota might look a little more difficult. Michigan State might look a little more difficult. Washington might look a little more difficult than initially thought. But that top tier team, Oregon and Ohio State, seem to be the only 2 left on the schedule. And for me, if Michigan just proved they can beat USC, that gives you confidence leading into the rest of the year.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with your point there. Again, I think, it's going to be matchup dependent. I mean, some of these teams want to muck it up like Minnesota, and then you have teams like Michigan State that have a really good run defense. I mean, that's their strength. And so I think it's going to be very, very much a matchup dependent schedule the rest of the way for Michigan and whether this thing can be successful. But I mean, again, they have an identity now, which they really lacked in the first 3 games. And I think that's important too. I mean, I think they know who they want to be and what they're going to be going forward. And I think that really kind of helps the understanding of the players and is more of a unifying factor within the locker room when you know exactly who you want to be.
Yeah. And then the identity, as we had thought it would be before this season, and it took a little bit to find it, is smash, right? Just, we are going to run the ball. We are going to hit you. We're going to possess it. We're not going to turn it over. We will accept. I mean, they're not the first coaches to have this line, but it is a very good line. You want to kick to end all your possessions, right? You're kicking for points or you're kicking to flip the field. But if you're not doing that, then something went wrong. And that was the reason Michigan was not ahead of the sticks, ahead of the game script. I mean, game script is going to be so huge for this team. That was the difference, or one of the major differences in Texas, where you're down 14-0 before you can blink versus, or 14-3, whatever, 24-3 at the half, versus USC, where a critical 14-0 lead, right? And we talk about finding this identity. Their identity is Kalel Mullings. He is the man that is going to make this offense go. Without him, there's a lot of guys who you could say, without him, where would this team be, right? Mason Graham, Will Johnson, Kenneth Grant. I mean, they even survived a game without Colston Loveland. But if there was no Kalel Mullings, for my money, this season would be dead and buried. I mean, his emergence, which could be seen, I mean, this is not some shock. Last year, he had some limited reps, 35, 36 carries, but he was averaging 6 apiece, right? He was their short yardage back, someone they trusted on 3rd and 1, 3rd and 2, 4th and 1 to get the job done. And now he has just emerged as one of the best running backs in the nation, Reiner. I mean, just and you don't even need the stats, which I'll read a few of them for you. Number 7 in the country in yards per carry, 8.1 yards per rush. Number 12 in total rushing yards. Number 17 in yards per game. He's averaging 107 rushing yards per game, and he only got to run 6 times against Texas, right? And so he's just been so productive. But my favorite stat, Reiner, he's averaging 5.9 yards per carry after contact. He's running through tackles. He's running over people, a little bit of around people. But I mean, this 63-yarder spinning, whirling, Marshawn Lynch style run is really the one that people will remember. But he'd been doing it before that. And Kalel is just from another planet.
Well, I mean, I agree. I mean, he was a person that has been reliable since he's been there. I mean, obviously he played defense and switched back to offense, and he was always kind of doing the dirty work leading up to this season. And so I think he's kind of a perfect symbol of what this team is. I mean, Michigan's going to have to do the dirty work to win games and play this style, which again is completely physical. And it's hard to understand why Michigan didn't want to lean into this earlier. The choice of picking Davis Warren over Alex Orji, I always thought was strange because, again, when you looked at the personnel for Michigan, they don't have great out receivers at all. It's incredibly weak outside skill position core that they have. And then you have your best players are your tight ends and your running backs. So you think you want to play heavy personnel and smash them anyway. And then that also enhances your biggest strength, which is your defense. And that starting unit doesn't have a lot of depth behind it. So you want to limit their snap count as much as possible to get them through this entire season, where you're also playing a tougher schedule than you have in the previous years, which means those starters are probably going to be out the field longer anyway. So why wouldn't you want to try to mitigate that as much as possible? So yeah, this whole thing really kind of goes back to Alex Orgy too. I mean, why they waited this long to figure this out, and supposedly it was during practice. But I think if they were committed to this idea of playing this physical style, which I think is the best way for Michigan to win games this year, then he should have probably been the option all along.
The evidence certainly seems to be pointing that way. However, I understand why Michigan, at least, I mean, I agree with you. It feels like they ran out that rope too long. They probably should have been able to just see this sooner. But I think in their heart of hearts, their desire was for a Tuttle or a Warren to win the job, only in the sense that you are limited if you can't pass the ball. And yes, Davis was turning the ball over at an alarming rate, but, and it's a big but. I like big butts, and I cannot lie. But here's big but here. Had he not been had you just coached that out of him, right? And yes, 6 turnovers is a ton. If it had been hammered, I mean, the way Alex Orgy was talking this week, he was not turning that ball over. I mean, no matter what, he was not turning that ball over. And a little part of me still thinks, had it just been hammered enough into Davis's mind, like, hey, just we're fine if you throw an incompletion. We're fine if you throw it away. Just don't turn it over. I still think the best version of this Michigan offense is one that has a semblance of a passing attack. However, it wasn't trustworthy. They could not do it. And it just wasn't working. And to your point, the wide receivers were not helping matters. The best the best players on this offense are all tackle to tackle or inside the lines, right inside the hashes. They're either lined up behind the big fellows or right next to them. So your point is right.
The other thing is, again, the offensive line. Especially a young offense, when you're replacing an offensive line, usually the best thing that they're good at is run blocking. It's much easier to go forward than it is to go backward. And then they had a really weak link, no pun intended, with Evan Ring on the right tackle position. I mean, he's like a turnstile, and that's so bueno if you're trying to pass the ball. So how do you mitigate that impact there, and how do you mitigate that kind of weakness? Well, you run the ball and avoid the pass rush altogether, which is exactly what Michigan did against Penn State. When they ran 32 straight times last year, they were getting. I mean, Carson Barnett was getting beaten
like a drum.
And this is a style that it's not perfect by any means, because, like you said, it exposes Michigan to a thin margin for error, as we saw with Edwards' fumble late in the game, put them in a really compromised position, almost lost in the game. That one turnover. But at the same token, it's also, given what they have personnel-wise, it's the only thing that makes really any sense.
I just want to say, I think important to point out that I think the biggest lesson here is winning cures all. I mean, this entire narrative is completely different had Khalil Mullins not burst through those tackles Marshawn Lynch-wise and got down to the red zone, because, the group chats aren't exactly reliable narrators. But my friends who, root for Michigan or text me, do we put Davis Warren back in for the final drive? I mean, or like, if you got to get a 3rd and 10, a guy who's not throwing it past the line of scrimmage all day, is he really the guy to do it? So, and now, everyone's back in on Orgy because they win the game. So winning cures all. It's just crazy to me how different of a narrative it is. And I think Reiner makes good points that this is probably the best way for them to win. But a lot of things did go their way to get that win, and a win's a win, and now you got to roll with what you have, right?
Can I read something that I wrote back in June?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know what it sounded like. I mean, I predicted this, but I mean, it just is like, it made a lot of sense even then. I said, after 10 of their 11 offensive starters exited the program this offseason, the Wolverines may be wise to lean into their identity more than ever. This receiving core, after all, is comprised of 9 players that produced a combined total of 46 catches for 479 yards at the FBS level. Likewise, not one of the 5 quarterbacks vying to succeed McCarthy is a proven college passer. With the returning tight ends and running backs considered Michigan's best assets, it stands to reason the Wolverines could regularly showcase heavy personnel packages. Orgy, with his blend of speed and lower body strength, could conceivably fit particularly well in that arrangement. to that end, Campbell said he would Kirk Campbell said he would tailor the offense to fit the players' individual skill sets. If it's Orgy, former Michigan tight end and Big Ten Network analyst Jake Butt told the Free Press, you're going to see a lot more quarterback run, quarterback power, and progression reads. And so that's exactly kind of what we saw against, USC. I mean, Orgy was able to kind of move the offense at times with his legs, keep them, on schedule, and also open lanes for the running backs between the tackles. And I think it's an effective strategy if you could put together the ingredients for the formula, which is building a lead early on.
I'm with Andrew in that this entire narrative is not for you, but the way it feels now, it's total revisionist history. It is all, Michigan is supposed to be about the process and not about the result. The process gets you the result. I don't know that this process is going to get this result time after time after time. Now, I mean, maybe the other way was even worse, right? And so you had to go this route. But I
don't disagree with that. I think this is the best of not a bunch of great options.
And it might end up being, I don't know, and maybe I'm a bad football, like maybe this is just my bad football judgment on this one. I'm not ready to concede that this is the best option yet. I mean, I think everybody is, right? It's so easy. Oh, they won. Oh, they got killed with Davis. Oh, he's turning it over. We need to pump the brakes a little bit because I want to go through to Andrew's point, how easily this game could have gone the other way without Kalel's heroics. And let's go back to the middle of the game, right? And why Michigan went the other way in the first place, or so I'd like to think. There were 6 drives in the middle of the game where Michigan went punt, 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 fumble, punt. Those drives lasted 6, 3, 3, 3, 1, and 3 plays. Not one of them was more than 2.5 minutes. That's what happens when a team makes an adjustment and just pins its ears back, right? And if a good team with a good defensive coordinator like Dan Lin, because think about the disadvantage USC was placed at. They had never seen a full game tape of Orgy running the offense. By the time they had a half, they're like, all right, we're going to do X, we're going to do Y, we're going to do Z, and you're not going to do anything. And Michigan didn't. It was Kalel Mulling's one run, just a game-changing play that is deciding this entire narrative. So I might end up being wrong, but I will not move off yet that Davis was wrong and Orgy is right. The results have gone that way. I absolutely see how there's a good path forward here, but the ceiling is capped. The ceiling is capped this way, and that is not what people expected. People thought Orgy was going to be the high ceiling guy.
What do you guys think is more likely? Tony, I think I know kind of where you're leaning, but that Orgy expands his passing game and, this offense kind of opens up and flourishes a little bit, or it continues to get worse and Davis Warren comes back and potentially takes the job back?
Well, then maybe I actually would go A, just because they don't want to have to hand the keys back the other way, right? Like they have no intention of going towards a passing offense. So what's more likely is that Orgy develops a little bit. They find Loveland comes back, it opens up some, and then you have something that resembles a passing game. I mean, they just, like we've been going over, no matter how it looked, they just beat a top 15 team in this way. That is the name of the game. Find a way, survive, advance. And they do have a recipe that can work to an extent. So I think they're going to stay this way, but I think they missed an opportunity by not rattling Davis's cage and hammering home the turnover point, because he could have thrown so many of those away. And then you wonder where they'd be.
You say that, well, they needed a miracle run, but that's what that does. I mean, by pounding and pounding and pounding, and eventually you bust. And that's the idea about it. I mean, it's a tough thing to kind of convince people that that's going to happen all the time. But yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty. Well,
sorry. Continue. Andrew and I are 5 years old. You're ready to continue with your point. No, What you said is correct. What you said is correct. They were wearing him down underneath, right? And when you just continue to hammer away, then something's gonna open.
What term should I be using?
No, you were right. You were right. We're 5 years old. I'm sorry. Oh God.
It's like one of those Troy Aikman videos they're like talking about on TikTok. Like if you cut them up and they sound a little suspect.
Yeah, sound like we're talking about something else. Sorry, Reiner. And I don't want to take away from the point, right? That is, I mean, eventually, right? If you just keep running and you keep going at him, one is going to break through, and that is certainly to be said. But yeah, I mean, even in the previous drives, right? I mean, the drive right before, 3 plays or 2 drives before the fumble, 3 plays, 1 yard. The drive before, 3 for 7. You really need it. I mean, I'd say it was more Kalel making a big play than the run breaking through, right? Like, because that very easily could have just been a very nice 12-yard run, which would have been a great play. And then you still got 65 more to go, They would have needed more. It's just, I don't know that you can count on it. And likewise, you made a great point in live time when USC deferred the kick, and you said it on our post-game video afterwards. We were talking about it. Some teams might want to start grabbing this ball, right? And try to get up first. You can't let Michigan get out to a lead. And so there's a lot that had to go right. A lot had to go right for this to happen.
Right. I mean, the early 14-0 lead, but I mean, that was, again, a byproduct of the fact that Michigan was able to gain an advantage with field position very early. By USC deferring and Michigan receiving the ball, they moved it just enough. They got that 4th and 1, which, again, was a delay of game. They were lucky, were able to advance the ball just enough to be able to flip the field in such a way that Tommy Dovin boomed a punt, got them inside the 10. That's where USC started. So they couldn't really run probably what they wanted to run on their first possession, which totally, again, set the tone for the game, even set the tone for Michigan's defense. Michigan really was pinning their ears back from the get-go and going after Miller Moss. And yeah, I think a lot of things went in Michigan's favor in that game for sure. And so it's going to be really dependent upon them dictating the terms from the outset and building a lead and playing from ahead, essentially. And so I don't know if they're going to be able to do that or not. But again, if I'm an opponent playing Michigan, I'm receiving that opening kickoff. If I'm going to win the coin toss, there's no deferring going on. You may like to defer. Most teams like to defer if they win the coin toss. You don't do that against Michigan. It just doesn't make much sense at all.
No, single high safety, 8 in the box, couple of corners on some islands, and let's play some ball. That's how I'm defending Michigan. You know what I mean? It's just,
right.
You better show us that you're better at your thing, and they are a lot better than a lot of teams. But you got to be a lot better if you're only doing one thing. You know what I mean? And then I just want to think about how this plays into this matchup. We'll get into a prediction and everything on the other side of the break, but just quickly, a little bit of some thoughts about Minnesota before a timeout. Michigan might be licking their chops a little bit here because, Minnesota basically just lost to Michigan. They lost to Iowa, who only passed for 62 yards, ran for 295, tried to possess the ball, and has a suffocating defense. The formulas are shockingly similar. And so that's why if you're Michigan, think about how long Michigan's made fun of Iowa, and everyone's made fun of Iowa for the way they have to do it. Well, you might need to rely on that formula to get to your 10-2 in the college football playoff, and wins feel different now, right? Like there's nothing wrong. Hey, just win. And so I wonder how Michigan feels about this game against Minnesota, because Minnesota was up 14-7 on Iowa in the first half, right? And they were dictating the terms. However, then Iowa comes out. Maybe it's just more depth. They start leaning a little bit. Maybe it's, to your point, that run game. Eventually it does wear you down. It's demoralizing to try to stop a run 55 times in a game. But then Iowa comes out of the break. Touchdown, field goal, touchdown. Iowa is punt. Minnesota is punt, turnover, punt, ball game. And so that quickly, if Michigan can get a lead, they can just kind of hold them under the water and drown them. However, if they don't, it's going to be another one of those games. How do you find a way to do it late?
Yeah. No, I think it's going to be very much a kind of a rock fight, this game. And Minnesota likes to play that style too. Their whole thing under PJ Fleck has been time of possession. When Michigan State's current defensive coordinator, Joe Rossi, was there. I mean, they played a lot of complementary football, and that's why Minnesota's defense was, consistently ranked in the top 10 in yards per game allowed, was partially because Fleck was, determined to control the time of possession and limit defensive plays that for his defense. And so I think it's the same situation is going on with Michigan. I mean, Sharon Moore wants to do that, but Minnesota also wants to do that. So we'll see what happens here, because I think they're in much in the same way. I mean, those Minnesota-Iowa games, this one wasn't as close as they are, but sometimes they've been like 13-12. I mean, very close games. And so I could totally see Saturday playing out just like a Minnesota-Iowa game.
Yeah, and I mean, they're still doing it the same way Minnesota is. I mean, they're number 32 in a similar way. I mean, number 32 in time of possession. They are number 8 in total defense. And so Michigan is 40th in time of possession. So Minnesota 32nd, Michigan 40th. So whoever wins that battle will certainly have the upper hand, one would figure.
I mean, like, just for instance, like the last 5 Minnesota-Iowa games, it was obviously 31-14 on Saturday, but 12-10 Minnesota, last year, 13-10 in 2022 between Iowa won, 27-22 in 2021. That was Iowa winning that one. So, it's like those teams play very close games, and it's just natural that they would, because, again, they play a similar style.
How about your fighting Iowa Hawkeyes? 32 points per game this year, 54th in the nation. They were 132 in the nation out of 133 last year. So
Tim Letcher, OC, he's not.
Unbelievable.
Very good over there. That was never an issue at Western Michigan. I don't think scoring points. So
a top 60 offense for them is like a top 10 offense for anybody else.
We've always said if Iowa gets a functioning offense, anything with a pulse, then they're a CFP team. I mean, that's what Iowa is. Iowa's always top 10, 15 defense nationally, period. So get a decent offense, and then you can function. As far just last thoughts, Reiner, before the break about Michigan. I know we touched on the passing game, and we know Michigan has a new formula, but I mean, it has to be more than this, right? Through the air. I mean, their leading receiver, who not named Colston Loveland, is Samaj Morgan, who has 12 catches for 62 yards. One of those catches was a 31-yard touchdown in the fourth quarter with 2 minutes against Texas's backups. That means everything else on the other 3 games and 3 quarters, he has 11 grabs for 31 yards. And that's the best. I mean, Marlon Klein, 5 for 60. Fred Moore, 4 for 43. Tyler Morris, 5 for 32. Reiner, these sound like a game. We're a month in.
Yeah, no, it's terrible. I mean, and it comes down to the fact that a lot of the receivers aren't gaining separation. They can't throw anything downfield. And I don't think Kirk Campbell's done a great job of scheming them open. I mean, again, some of these bubble screens and things, it's just not going to work. I mean, you've got to do more to get these guys open. I mean, there's other ways that teams work around these issues. And so far, I mean, he hasn't done anything really from a play design standpoint that's really helped. And so, yeah, I think it leaves a lot to be desired. And, it's going to rear its ugly head at some point where, I mean, they're really not going to be able to just throw it to Loveland or Morrow Klein to get anything. So, I mean, they're going to have to go to the wide receivers on the outside, and they're probably going to have to complete a deep shot or two. I mean, and that's the crazy thing. I mean, the run is supposed to set up the pass. I mean, in a lot of ways. I mean, you could run play action, and it should work, but they haven't done anything to prove that they can even complete a downfield pass. So why would teams, lean towards or take the bait on the play action? I mean, it just is like, yeah, I think that they're got to do more to try to scheme these guys open, and I don't think they've done enough there.
Got to wonder if, I mean, I have my reservations if Alex Orji can complete downfield throws. I mean, coaches say he can, players say he can. Oh, in practice all the time, see it all the time. I didn't see it once in the spring game. I haven't seen it once in a live game now. And I mean, 7 of 12 passing this last week, 5 of those 7 completions were at or behind the line of scrimmage. The other 2 were between 5 and 9 yards downfield. There is absolutely nothing. I mean, I don't think it's almost not an exaggeration to say that a wildcat quarterback, a true wildcat quarterback, like a running back, could make these throws. What was asked on Saturday? There has to be more than, 5 passes behind the line of scrimmage. Just 2 passes all day in 2024 completed beyond the line of scrimmage is just wild. Again, nothing to apologize for when you're singing the victors and you're jumping in the student section afterwards. So that's, again, I think that's a good place to put a bow on this. You can see it both ways, right? They just found a way, which is all you got to do, to win a top 15 game, and now they're back on track. Or that was a mirage, and this is not sustainable. People will see it how they see it, and we will see it how we see it, and time will tell. So don't go anywhere. We have the picks on the other side of the break. This is Hail Yes. All right, we are back. Time to make predictions about college football games around the country. And to do that, we bring in Andrew Burkle.
Fun weekend ahead, guys. Got Georgia, Alabama. We got, Michigan State, Ohio State, which, if you judge it based off the spread, may not be a very fun game, but, should be a fun weekend in college football here. So let's start with Michigan and Minnesota here.
Andrew, Andrew loves to not go over the picks when he doesn't have a good week, I tell you.
I do love to do that. You're right. I've been ice cold. I'll just lay it out there. I've been ice cold. 1-3 last week. I think I was 1-3 the week before that. Yeah, it's been a little ugly here, but I think we're gonna get the train back on the tracks here. Got a good feel for this week. Tony went 3-1 last week. He would be so quick to tell you to point out here. So, but he did pick the Michigan game wrong. So we will hold him out to dry for that
only job, my only actual job. So well done.
Yep, pretty much. So for the season, Tony is 10-7. I am 7-10. Yikes. And Reiner is 8-9. So still within catching distance of Tony. Maybe we'll add some more games towards the end of the year here. But I said we'll start with Michigan, but let's keep them for last so people have to wait around for it. We'll start with Illinois, Penn State, Saturday night showdown. Penn State is a 10-point favorite. Reiner, you think they can get the job done there at home?
Yeah, I think, it's a night game, and, that atmosphere in Beaver Stadium is pretty crazy. And plus, I think, again, Penn State's shown enough from their offense so far. The new OC has done a good job, with Drew Aller and the receivers that they have there. And so I think Penn State is going to win this going away against Illinois, even though Illinois, I think, is definitely surpassed expectations this year, and that victory against Nebraska in another tough environment was very impressive. But I just think Penn State will really come out firing in this game and go take care of business here.
I'm going to ride with you on Penn State, Reiner, in particular, not just because Illinois helped me look smart against you guys last week when they covered and won outright at Nebraska. Totally predictable. Nebraska's always overrated. We just all need to remember this for week 4 next year. But it's really hard. I mean, Saban says it. A lot of good coaches say it's really hard to get up week after week, right? And back-to-back big time games, big environments. Illinois, coming off a high like that, now you're top 20. I think they're 19th or something. People are really feeling good about Illinois. But Penn State finally, it seems, does not just have a defense. This offense is pretty good, right? They put up 34 against West Virginia, then 34 against Bowling Green, 56 against Kent State. Those are not good MAC teams, but Penn State is averaging 45 a game. That's a great spot for them to be. You said it. Beaver Stadium, night game, probably a whiteout. I haven't seen that. I'm guessing. I think they get this one by, I think they pull away in the second half. So maybe 5-14. So it'll be around 7 most of the way.
Much like Iowa, I'm kind of impressed with this Illinois offense. Luke Oldmeyer leading the Big Ten with 10 touchdown passes. And I wanted to pick Illinois so bad, and I really did. And I was like, it's just not that great of a spot for him. But then I thought about it, I was like, you know what? I'm gonna ride with the Fighting Illini here. I think they've got enough on offense. They've got a top 15 defense, only 12.5 points per game for their opponents so far this year. 32.2 points per game on offense, and a quarterback who makes timely plays and proved he does last week in a big spot on the road at Nebraska. So I don't know if Illinois wins, but I think they keep it close and kind of an ugly road game. Just make this thing kind of grimy and keep it close against Penn State. So on Penn State, as good as they've looked pretty solid, but they also almost lost at home. Really should have probably lost to Bowling Green. So I think that they're not like some buzzsaw who's unbeatable. And by the way, that goes to show, besides, is there any team across the country besides maybe Texas who hasn't almost lost? Georgia almost lost to Kentucky. Alabama almost lost to USF. Texas has looked pretty strong, but besides the Michigan game, their schedule has been pretty soft. But the parity is pretty strong across the country this year.
It is. And I mean, you said, Luke Altmaier he was really impressive last week. So there's not a lot of teams, not a lot of spots where I'd be picking against Illinois with 10 points, but this is one of them for me.
Fair enough. All right. Michigan State, Ohio State, two of the Wolverines rivals facing off this weekend. This series has not gone well for Michigan State as of late. So year one of Jonathan Smith's new regime up there in East Lansing, looking to turn a new leaf against Ohio State, but 24 point underdogs. It was 24.5. Tony, you think Michigan State can cover this one?
Wow. I was ready for our Big Ten insider to go first, and then I was just going to kind of copy whatever he said and then just kind of use that. But man, it's really tough. Another one. Michigan State could be 4-0, right? I mean, they just played BC down to the wire. And when you think about the environment there, right? It was the Wells game, I can't remember, but the red bandana game for Wells, the young man who went to BC who died in the 9/11 tragedy as a hero. And so, I mean, the vibes in Chestnut Hill were high last week, and they did pull it out. But for MSU to survive that opening schedule 3-1, and find some things, Reiner talked about the run defense earlier, and something like that, I think could be critical in keeping this game tight. I mean, they've been getting their doors blown off by Ohio State. I mean, since a close 1-point loss in 2016, they've been outscored. I mean, I saw our Chris Solari on Freep.com had it. I don't know the exact. They've been outscored like 320-50. I mean, just it's over before it starts. This game, year after year after year. That might change this year. Michigan State hasn't been blown out of anything in a while, and Ohio State, they're very good, but they don't have that same. I mean, it's not the same explosive passing attack against what was horrendous Michigan State secondary for years. So 24 is a lot of points, and Michigan State hasn't played that well at home night. I don't know if that's even keeping it close. That's keeping it semi-respectable. And based on what they've done through 4 weeks, I like their chances to do that.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think, Michigan State, so far this season has, again, been competitive all the way throughout and should be, like you said, possibly 4-0. And I think going off that game against Boston College, I think Agent Giles is going to be just a lot more conscious. And I think he's going to also be able to step up in this kind of environment against this opponent. And, knowing Jonathan Smith and what he's able to do, I just don't see him getting the doors blown off them and allowing for that to happen. And Joe Rossi, so far with his defense, has been able to keep Michigan State in the game throughout. They rallied the football really well. So I don't think you're going to see as many of the busts that you've typically seen against Ohio State happen. So that just gives me more confidence that this game is going to be a little bit closer than what, the Vegas odds makers suggest with their line.
I mean, I can see where you guys are coming from, and I think Michigan State's defense is actually pretty respectable, especially when you consider where it was just last year, probably one of the worst 2 to 3 year stretches of defense in MSU history, honestly. I mean, they couldn't stop anybody. With that said, my takeaway has been, I watched Michigan State this year, and Childs will miss, a walk-in Montorie Foster Jr. touchdown, or he'll throw a ball that should be a first down behind a guy. Some of them are caught, some of them are dropped. And every time I watch it, I'm just like, that's not going to fly against Ohio State. That's just the thought that goes into my brain. So, as much as there is the and Michigan State does have some juice, they'll put together some good drives. That big drive they had against Boston College last week, they ended up getting a field goal that probably should have been a touchdown that was dropped. they can put together some long drives, which is progress. But at the same time, they're just shooting themselves in the foot way too much at this stage. Holding penalties that are putting them behind the sticks, false starts, blown up run plays that put them behind the sticks. And against a team like Ohio State, I just don't think that they're going to have the juice to continue those long drives. So I think, it's right around 24, maybe 27, 31, somewhere in that range, where Michigan State keeps it a little close in the first half, and then things just kind of get away from them. That's kind of how I see this one going, because Ohio State, first and second thing is, too, this is Ohio State's first real test to put something on paper after a really weak non-conference slate. They can kind of make a statement here, and I think they do. They take the opportunity, and Michigan State falls to 3-2. And they've had, the state's got an absolutely brutal schedule, kind of like Michigan as well. So I think Michigan State moves to 3-2. All right, let's go to the last non-Michigan game here. Georgia versus Alabama. Reiner's Crimson Tide hosting Georgia as a 2-point underdog. You don't see that very often in Tuscaloosa. So I think Georgia covers. Oh, it looks like Tony's got a point here.
Quick note, first time since 2007. I saw. First time since Alabama is an underdog in Tuscaloosa since 2007.
And it's their first time in a regular season game in I can't remember the stat, but it was also multiple years since they've even been an underdog in the regular season at all, but at home since 2007. So, Ryder, you think they win at home as an underdog?
No, I don't. I think Georgia's just, under Kirby Smart. It's just, I just have more faith in them at this point than Alabama under Kalen DeBoer. And that's no knock on Kalen DeBoer. It's just how good Kirby Smart has been and in these kind of games too. Right? And I think, they're going to come out much better than they did against Kentucky and be able to handle that kind of environment. Alabama's got a good home crowd. I don't think they're, the best home crowd in the SEC by any measure. So I don't think it's going to be any kind of super tough environment necessarily for Georgia. So, or Carson Beck and that offense. So I think in general, I have more faith in Kirby Smart in Georgia right now than I do with the Tide being able to pull that one out.
Yeah. It's the devil, right? Not the Kalen DeBoer hasn't, he turned FSU into Fresno State into a power. Then he had tons of success in Washington. We're familiar with him, but one of these things is not like the other. And Kirby Smart is just next level. And unless Georgia and Bama are meeting in an SEC title game, then it just feels like that's when sort of the thing, that's when Alabama keeps getting them, and that's when it really goes back and forth. But Georgia, too good. Some revenge from last year, right? Georgia's thinking they should be going for a three-peat. They've lost once in the last 3 years, and they didn't even get a shot at the Natty. And this was the team that stopped that. So, Bulldogs.
Good point there by Tony. But I've been thinking about how this game is kind of one of the first real quote-unquote casualties of the 12-team playoff. Because if this game was played last year, in a lot of ways, it would really be a kind of a win or go home for one of these teams, because it would define the playoff in a lot of ways, because you'd have maybe a potential rematch in the SEC championship game, but it'd be really hard for both those teams to squeeze in. As we saw last year, Georgia ran the table in the regular season, lost in the SEC championship game, and they're out. So I think that this game is kind of one of the first ones where it's okay, that was fun. Both these teams are still potentially in the playoffs. So not to rain on the parade a little bit, but I agree with you guys. I think Georgia's just further along in their program. They're until Nick Saban says it, until someone beats Georgia, they're going to be the favorite, and that's true. So maybe Georgia wins this one, and then we see them face Texas. That could be a fun game. But that's the good news about the new college football landscape, is we get these fun crossover games like Michigan USC and Georgia versus Texas potentially in the SEC championship game. So these teams are all playing gauntlets, but I think that Georgia takes care of business here, and the 2 points, it doesn't, it's basically a pick 'em at 2 points. So I'm going to roll with the Bulldogs.
We're in lockstep there, Andrew. I don't know if anyone else is. I don't have anything else to add.
Yeah, I was waiting for you to say something.
No. I gave my analysis on the game. I guess a quick thought. Trevor Etienne, the running back from Florida transfer, I think he might be Georgia's most explosive player. And Malachi Starks is a really good safety. That's a player to watch on each side for Georgia. That's what I got.
Yeah. Alabama had that impressive win up at Wisconsin. Milroe looks like he's developing as a passer a little bit, but there's still leaves a little bit on the table, it seems like at times as a passer. So
Yeah.
we'll see. I mean, if Milroe looks fantastic and, picks apart Georgia and that flips a lot about what we think about this season, right?
I will tell you, he threw one ball in the Rose Bowl, Ryder. You remember that ball? I think Isaiah Bond caught it. I can't remember. It was left hash up the right sideline, like 40-yard bread basket. And then, that was a scary throw. Like if there was any level of consistency there, like, yeah, you would meet.
Yeah, I don't think the arm talent.
Yeah, you're right.
But he's not consistent.
Not the arm talent.
It's like, I think it's like Orji. Orji's got a huge arm, but we're not sure. Not sure where it's going. He is. I'm saying a similar style. It's not about the ability to throw a football. It's about
and he's actually
on time,
pretty
on target.
Deep shots. He's really good at deep shots. It's the underneath stuff that he just can't.
It's because on a deep shot you can just let it rip, right? You can use all your arm talent. Those intermediate throws, you're kind of guiding, right?
Yeah,
it's
right.
It's those touch passes. We see even like take someone like Matthew Stafford. I remember how many years it took him to develop that touch pass. That was the knock on him early when he got to Detroit. He's a gunslinger. He can rip it. He can change his arm angle. He can't just loft it over the DB. Now he can, but there's a big development curve in touch passing.
Matthew Stafford's still balling out, man. Just rips the 49ers hearts out last week with the game-winning field goal and drive there.
No Cooper Kupp, no Puka Nacua.
I know. Tutu Atwell just slashing through the 49ers.
That was a heck of a great.
That guy's playing great football.
No, he is. He's really good. All right, let's get to Michigan.
Good Rams discussion there.
oh my God.
Of course.
It's a good thing we're going to move on, because if we had this podcast when that Detroit Rams crap was going on, I might be out of the job. I'm just going to leave it at that. I might be out of the job. That was the most disgusted I've ever been with anything sports related.
That was certainly a time period that Detroit fans will not want to remember.
They should all be ashamed.
Even I was like, all right, yeah, it's good for Stafford.
I can accept that. I can accept happy for Stafford. You're selling Detroit Rams gear in our city. I burn it.
Rams need all the fans they can get.
But now they got St. Louis, they got Detroit, they got Los Angeles. Now they're spreading.
All right, let's finish it off. Michigan, Minnesota here. The Wolverines are a 9-point favorite. That spread's come down quite a bit. Some places you saw it 11.5, some as high as 12, all the way down to 9, which if you're a gambler, that's a huge difference. You pay a pretty penny to buy that price down from 12 to 9. So obviously some money coming in on Minnesota here, but do you guys think the Wolverines can cover 9 points?
I think it's going to be just a really tight game. And no, I don't think so. I think Minnesota, keeps it within a touchdown. I think it's something like 20-13. That kind of game. It reminds me of maybe the game that Michigan played against Rutgers in 2021, which was also 20-13. I think it just, it's going to be tight. I think all the way through. It's the style that Minnesota plays, and now it's the style that Michigan plays. So it's expected again a kind of vintage Big Ten slugfest, right? And so, yeah, that's my take on this game going into Saturday.
And I'm also going under. That is what I would say. I expect the teams to shorten this game. They both want to run. Neither of them wants to turn it over. They want. We've kind of been going over it throughout the episode, right? But they both want to do the same thing. They want to run. They want to shorten the game. They want to limit possessions. They want to flip the field. And they want to take points when they can get them. Michigan is the better team pretty much across the board. However, Minnesota is a little more multiple in their quarterback from New Hampshire, Max. I don't have his name in front of me. Brosmer. He's been decent. He's given them a pulse through the air. But just, if you're not a really good offense or have some elite pieces, Michigan's just going to suffocate you. So maybe Minnesota can get the ball in some good field position with a shanked punt or with if Orji does, with a fumble from a wide receiver or something like some weird turnover. I don't see Minnesota moving it across the field multiple times and finding the end zone multiple times. I think they get to 10. And Michigan's going to be, you're right there, right around 19, maybe 4 field goals and a touchdown, maybe 2 touchdowns and 3 field goals, somewhere in that 19-23 range. So somewhere between 9 and 13 points, but 20-10 Michigan. So no, didn't I end up taking Minnesota? I forgot which way I had gone. I've been. He
doesn't even know his own picks.
Yeah, and in case that cap wasn't all over it. You can see I'm right on that line. I'm right on the line, which is obviously the idea of it. And I had waffled.
But he's like Dr. Max at betting from like The Simpsons. Dr. Max.
I'm gonna just whenever I say do the opposite. No, Minnesota +9.
Okay. Before I get to my pick, I just want to ask you guys, as people close to the team, metaphorical weapon of choice to your head. Colston Loveland, play or not play against Minnesota? Quick answer. Not play. Ryder?
Which one? I'm sorry.
Colston Loveland.
Would you?
Does he play or not?
I don't know. I can't. There's no way I can predict that. I have no idea what the extent of the injury is and everything. But obviously they don't have to play him. They probably won't. They'd probably prefer to keep him or get him as healthy as possible. Also, he has the NFL considerations to when that are factored.
What about Will Johnson? Same thing. Kind of
play.
A little less than 50%, maybe.
No, I think he'll go. They had him speak to media on Monday, and then Michigan doesn't often do that. If they're planning on
see, that's the kind of behind the curtain analysis we get only on Hell Yes. Because was Loveland speaking?
No.
Interesting.
We haven't talked to Colston in a while, actually.
Read into that however you may.
I would lean both
Michigan
those ways. I would lean no Colston and lean yes Will. Certainly, I'm more confident on Will. I'd put Will at like 90%.
Yeah, because he spoke Monday, so I think
Okay, cool, interesting. I did not know that little wrinkle. I'm going to pick Minnesota as well, not because I'm super impressed by the Golden Gophers. They got picked apart by Iowa in that second half, and that game just completely got away from them. And it looks like they were in control there for a while. But Tony made a good point earlier in the podcast about USC having the book on Michigan after that first half. Well, now Minnesota gets to watch the first and second half. They get to see what worked and they get to see what didn't work. So I think this game gets ugly. I think Michigan wins, but I think, like Tony said, maybe something like 3 or 4 Minnesota field goals and, a couple touchdown for Michigan and a couple extra field goals themselves, something like maybe 17, 10 or 17-12, somewhere in that range, real ugly game. And if you look at the spread, the over-under, I should say, Vegas thinks it's going to be similar. It's, 30 in the 30s, which you don't see that very often. I think there's only like 4 or 5 other games across the country in the 30s. One of them is like Texas because they're expected to blow someone out. It's not often that 2 Big Ten teams play each other, and Iowa's not involved in the over-unders in the 30s. So I'm going to go with Minnesota just because 9 in a over-under that low is a kind of a tall climb.
It is. And just for perspective, I think the over-under is 35.5 with a line at 9. That means Vegas is capping this at somewhere around like 22-13. So, as we've been saying, not a lot of points expected. All right. That'll do it for this episode of Hail Yes. Thanks, everybody, for listening and playing along. You can continue to do so at freep.com or anywhere you get your podcasts. Please rate, review, subscribe, and say nice words about Reiner and Andrew. You can say them about me as well if you're so inclined. And thank you to everybody who makes this possible. Those are people like Editor-in-Chief Nicole Avery Nichols and our audio engineer, Robin Chan. Hi, Robin. Thanks for editing this podcast later. That's going to do it today. We're speaking to coordinator Wake Martindale shortly and offensive line coach Grant Newsome. Reiner and I may have things from those availabilities later on freep.com. Got a scouting report coming for you, breaking down the game against Minnesota. Reiner, anything specific on your end to look for?
Well, no.
Right. I won't have Reiner. I will not have Reiner this weekend. Right, you'll be in East Lansing.
Yes, I will be.
As if you could offend Michigan fans anymore. You'll be in East Lansing for Michigan State versus Ohio State. But I do think even our listeners here understand Reiner covers both teams. That is a more intriguing matchup. I think you could call it. So I'll miss you. Man, now I'm sad. Single tear. All right, that'll do it. For Andrew, for Reiner, I'm Tony. See you later.